third stage, according to Adi Da, as that's the foundation of dilemma. The third stage is dilemma.
Right, and that dilemma is the, as you start to assert yourself and be yourself, the declaration of independence, both personally and historically, culturally. You always want to fall back and be in dilemma. You want to be fed as a child stimulations, being the center of attention, all these kinds of, not just feeding nursing as we talked about in the first stage, right, but fed in a variety of experiences and all these, you're still involved in a feeding, but instead of emotional feeding being the center, being the golden boy, all those kinds of feeding where you're the center of attention. So you will still want that. You're still dependent on that. You're still hardwired by life experience for that, and yet then you want to be independent. So you go between dependence and independence, and that's a double bind. That's the source of dilemma.
Okay, so then there's always this fundamental need, and either in the adolescent, which is really the movement. If people move into the third stage, because some people really don't fully move into the third stage, so this dilemma is now you're in the search to be fed through life, through power, through experience, through sexual conquests, whatever it is the game is, the search is now enacted based on this kind of feeling of loss or sense of need.
Right. Need is there, and because you're not already integrated, then and therefore rested in reality itself, communion with reality itself, therefore you will seek it.
Right.
And so the search per se begins in the third stage of life. The search is always a characteristic of all of the stages, as long as there's less than utter divine realization. But so you're always seeking that which is less, or which is more. But the third stage of life is the actual crystallization, because you have a mind, and you're responding to that need, and you think, oh, basically, you know how they say you want to get back to the mother, and they say, oh, you want to get back to the womb, oh, you want to get back to your magical childhood. There's all those temporary satisfactions are now projected as if they can be accomplished or gotten, taking heaven by storm, as Master Da used to criticize me about, and others. But now, so that conscious mind can make strategies, can make searches, and so our search for God, our search for spiritual truth, and all that is a third stage occupation.
And it seems to be a necessary gesture in the development of the human individual.
Absolutely.
But yet there is a kind of a double-edged sword here, because in that development where you have to engage the world in all your functions and in all your relationships, and you must adapt to the world, because that's really the key of the third stage, is integration and adaptation in the full frontal personality. There is this subtle kind of dilemma, is that there's a seeking for some kind of ultimate union or satisfaction, and then there's an
for me.
Oh, now we got this principle. We got this principle that needs to be loved, to be acknowledged, to be satisfied, to achieve.
The center of attention.
The center of attention. So here now we have the culprit. We have a subtle thing going on here. We have something that's motivating this movement. And that is what the Adi Da calls the Narcissus principle. And so maybe we should talk a little bit about the Narcissus principle in Adi Da's teaching.
Well, as you know, Narcissus in Greek mythology was the beloved, beautiful, golden boy who was loved without needing to love. And so he left home because nobody loved him enough. He was not satisfied by being loved. And he found a pond where he was self-fascinated by someone finally as beautiful as he needed to look at, but he did not know that it was himself. Mm-hmm. So Narcissus is a icon or an image of self-fascination. And no matter how much you are loved, that doesn't satisfy you. It's when you love that the very thing that you wanted to be, you wanted resolution with. When you love, better to give than to receive.
And so, in the psychological interpretation of this, Adi Da talks a lot about the Freudian theory of the Oedipus complex, mm-hmm. which is from the Greek story. And so he says, and so does Freud say, is that basically this kind of unconscious interpretation as the baby, as a
infantile interpretation, yeah,
right, which is pre-verbal now. This is pre-conceptual. This is not an understanding like the baby knows what's happening here, but there is this sense of you have the source of mother, mm-hmm. whether you're male or female, and then you have the father who is in relationship to mother, who then therefore
takes mom away from you.
Right. And so then there's a fundamental sense in this Oedipal development called and interpreted as, you don't love me. There's a sense of betrayal. And out of that sense of betrayal mm-hmm. is now seen as now you're testing, you're always testing, and then therefore verified, because your primary first philosophical gesture, if you will, is,
he says, mm-hmm.
as this
center
interprets what is happening, either good or bad, it doesn't matter, is that you don't love me, which then justifies I don't love you.
Right. And as he points out, you don't love me is the dependence phase, or the first two stages of life, and then you interpret it as, and then I don't love you, therefore I don't love you, as more of a third stage.
Justifiably.
Mm-hmm. Justifiably, yes.
Principles. You're on principles now. There is justification for me not loving you.
Because you don't love me. And this is a good point relative to the person being the center. And I feel that I'm here and I'm a center, and basically I want to be the center of the universe, and I want to be the center of every situation. I want to be the adored one. I want Mama to love me and only me. All that, I deserve more than my share. You name it.
So the body becomes the center of who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And then as this develops in mind, then mind becomes who you are.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And so then there's a disassociation here between mind and body as most of this third stage develops, because you become more conceptually based and higher mind developed, and it tends to kind of leave these centers. You don't want to get into this feeling, because at this
level, you don't get into what feelings?
Into the body feeling.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to come down, because these interpretations are locked in the body.
Mm-hmm.
with
right. It's the pain of childhood.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have fear
mm-hmm.
at the root.
Mm-hmm.
You have loss, sorrow,
mm-hmm.
and then you have, as the third stage develops, anger, because you then basically are seriously pissed off for being ripped off.
Justifiably so.
Justifiably so.
Yes, very much.
So don't piss me off, because I'm got my principles.
Because I'm right. Don't you love people that are right all the time? Yes. Well, that reminds me of, in looking back again, the first stage of life is characterized by sleepiness or unconsciousness. The second stage of life is characterized by dreaminess or subconsciousness. And the third stage of life is characterized by mere conscious.
Mere
conscious. And so, because you're, you know, makes sense to me, and you're justified, and you're always making rational pronouncements, and it's all in the head, as you say, cut off. So that capacity to stand apart and analyze and see things, which makes good science, becomes its own trap. We think we're behind the eyes, looking out. We think the center is I, and we adapt. As Master says, when the verbal portion of the mind becomes more or less continuous, we become possessed by the illusion that I is identical to the verbal mind. Right. And we fear the loss of thought. We fear the loss of body. We fear everything below. And we retreat into the interiority of verbal mind. What is necessary is that we enter into take this rightly integrated, rightly individuated person into centerless communion, because reality is not centered. It is the centerless real God. So we're having this point where we become very centered, and we even develop centeredness as a third stage necessity.
Because we're talking about a strong
yes, you have to do that. But then being possessed that is it. Right. It's just a portal, because then you must submit yourself, your center, into communion with the real, which is a centerless condition. Mm-hmm. So that kind of sets up the trial of the third stage. You must come to a integrated center, which is hard to do in and of itself, because you're always dealing with your Oedipal and narcissistic complications. Those all have to be harmonized by understanding and will, to the point that you can then surrender positively.
And this is key, is that this kind of sense of, you will never get hip to your script if you don't fully engage your script. If you're always in this childish or adolescent reaction, either consciously or subconsciously, and maybe a little bit consciously, is that you will never engage it, so you will never enter into the full understanding of your dilemma. And you will always find yourself in a victim circumstance, and so you will always retreat to some kinds of safety, whether it be some parental or cultural circumstance.
Or delusional.
Or you will generate some kind of organizational attachment, whether it be through some kind of a religious, because
political, communal,
right?
Spiritual. Yep. And so, and it really is a substitute for parent.
It's definitely, the whole point of adolescence is moving out of this sense of being parented, but yet also being put out there into the world where you engage it. But the tendency, because there is so much fear and challenge, remember, this whole thing is about dealing with the challenging force in the third stage and adapting to that. Most people will move back from that and into some kind of a protected kind of place for the feeling of vulnerability. But you won't feel that because you feel as a victim. This is like,
me.
There's always the sense of me behind it. And so the whole point of the third stage is moving out of the parenting phase of life, where you as fully integrate as an individual.
Right, and then what you encounter in as you start to individuate, as you say, is what we call the Dark Trinity.
Ah.
Go ahead, tell me.
The Dark Trinity is the sense of I,
me,
which creates other, which then therefore creates world. So now you have the sense of me, which immediately brings up this other.
World.
Well, then that in the larger context is other. So there's me, there's you, and then there's this context.
Or God apart. And God apart.
World, God, universe, cosmos, nation,
me,
state.
world, and God.
Me, world, and God is the Trinity that comes out of this fundamental sense of individuation or separateness.
Yeah, separateness.
It's different than individuation, because individuation is the manifestation of
natural.
Right, it's the natural growth. Everything has its own motions, and your physical, your emotional, your mental, and it has to be incorporated. But there's a dark side, which is basically the unconscious side, which people aren't generally aware of, and then create scripts and stories
and searches, and I'm going to realize God, or I'm going to become rich, or but what tends, as we first emerge into that, we are separative in our individuation, and that is solved. You're always in a dilemma at that point, and you're trying to solve it by searching for money, food, and sex, God, you name it, better community, the right circumstance. You're always trying to solve that separativeness that comes with beginning individuation, and it never works that way.
And the key in this is that you're seeking order. You're seeking security, or the individual in its movement out wants to find security and order.
As he says, to Narcissus, order is truth.
Right. To the place of murder, to the place of insanity.
Yeah, I'm right. Everybody else is wrong because my order, blah, 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 blah.
So as you circle into the world and spiral around, and if you fully investigate it, you will start to go down a rabbit hole.
A toilet hole.
And as you go down the rabbit hole, the intensification of this search, of this dilemma, magnifies. And people usually don't enter into this kind of rabbit hole, into the dark underside of one's consciousness, because there is going to be a confrontation with oneself.
Lack of order, irrational, pre-rational.
Oh, yeah, I got to be this, because if I don't do it, everybody, what's going to happen to the world? What's going to be? I'm the center. I'm the center. I'm creating this whole thing, and I've got to stay tight and hold to ship, because I may.
Or just the embarrassment of losing face. You have to lose face. You have to not be the golden boy. You have to not be the center, because reality is centerless. And so you have to come to centeredness and then integrate it by surrendering that individuation and in the necessary integration of all your functions, both below consciousness and in the world, into communion with the real.
And as Adi Da says so many times, the confrontation in the third stage of life is with mortality, in this sense of separate, individuated being. And so one of the things that must be acknowledged is that all the parenting, the looking for connection, the looking for the fed, to be nurtured, and to be secured, is all about that we exist in a mortal frame. We exist in a mortal, changing environment. And not acknowledging that will create this sense of eternal life through whatever your parent is, be it Jesus, be it God, be it whatever the religious beliefs are, or your own philosophical system, is that you're saving this one. You know, Jesus died for your sins, and you don't have to die. And so out of this comes, you don't love me, and then therefore I don't love you. And this is the primary kind of philosophical gesture that the third stage must deal with. And if one is going to move beyond, because we have only gotten now to the third stage, we still have the fourth, fifth, and sixth, and seventh stage of life. So it doesn't all end here. You know,
but this is the crucial. This is especially in our historical and cultural moment. We live in a teenage wasteland. There is no great fourth stage culture that is pulling us through this. We are. This is our moment. So it is a teenage wasteland, and we are all punks in some sense. We're all looking for it. We're going to take heaven by storm. We're all going to solve the problem. We're all those kind of things. We are going to. This is our moment to exceed the liabilities of the third stage. And as you were saying, one of the ways the crucial things is to confess. the very thing that you're trying to solve, that you feel sorrowful, that you're afraid, that you treat all men like, in a characteristic way, and all women in a characteristic way. You actually investigate and confess the narcissism that I might go. You have to actually feel the sorrow around your heart.
Narcissus fights his own help.
Mm-hmm.
He resists his own vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
We exist in a vulnerable place.
Open-ended.
Open-ended.
And we don't like it. It's threatening. Because it's threatening because we assume that we are separate. Mm-hmm. And so therefore we are a individual. We have a psychic part, but in a physical world, which is not true. We are a psychophysical event in a psychophysical world. But the error of the third stage, when you're behind your eyes looking out, identify with the verbal mind, as he points out, even your foot seems to be down there. Mm-hmm. And so this hedge or castle of Narcissus interiority makes for a spiritual life interior. Oh, I'm going to look within. That's still narcissism of the individual. So instead, let us confess our need, that we are living in a world of things. That's our presumption. That, oh yeah, this is not a psychophysical world. We're psychic and the world's physical. No. We have to confess those kind of presumptions. We have to feel our narcissism, feel our Oedipal, feel our anger, our sorrow, our looking somebody's to the third stage, or somebody's always more powerful than you, and you're more powerful than the others, and you really want to climb that ladder so that you can be invulnerable at the top. Mm-hmm. All that has to be confessed. It is the crucial understanding.
Right. And the gesture in the third stage of life is to feel that you are continuous with life, that mm-hmm. life is not just the forms in which it exists in. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that cannot happen from this place. Mm-hmm. It has to happen from this place. Mm-hmm. And this is the prior place that Adi Da always addresses. It's either this mm-hmm. or that.
And in the third stage, you're going to understand this with a new kind of acuity.
Right.
You understand this. I mean, you can teach this to first stagers. Absolutely. You can teach this to little kids that they're doing this and not this. You can teach this to second stagers that when somebody rejects you, you want to reject them. You can teach it in some modalities, but now it becomes acute. Now, there's an acuity, a mental acuity, because of the capacity that's awakened in the third stage, and depth of responsibility is possible.
And it becomes your responsibility. Mm-hmm.
Right.
The third stage of life is characterized by irresponsibility.
and the taking of responsibility.
Right. And you, as a third stager, always have a subtle philosophical gesture that you don't have to become fully responsible, the ability to respond. Mm-hmm. And that means to love, because you have justified yourself into that withholding position or the dominating position. So the third stage of life is responsibility, to love, and to be responsible for your withholding.
Fundamentally. Mm-hmm.
Fundamentally, of I am not a loving person because you don't love me, mm-hmm. and therefore I then don't have to love you. Mm-hmm. And so the third stage of life is about responsibility for mature adaptation to life in the way life is.
Right. You have to turn from self, mm-hmm. confess self, and make that fundamental turn, metanoia, repentance, conversion. That's going to be the fulfillment, because you've taken all the secondary responsibilities, right diet, right livelihood, right relations, all those things. That gives you a foundation for this primary responsibility you were just talking about, of vulnerability, openness. You're responsible and open, mm-hmm. and because you see how your manipulativeness is unhappy. You see how your manipulativeness is about me.
I want the attention The tension
right,
is
all
always
that, and you see your mind. You actually understand. As Master says, Narcissus is the thinking mind. It is the waking state, and so we understand this as we take more and more responsibility for our life and our primary action. So that conversion is that understanding of conversion, which would be understanding and will. That understanding and conversion is what moves us out of the third stage of life, or we emerge slowly out of the third stage of life. But what's fighting us? We're going to think of everything, every possibility other than that, other than vulnerability, other than actual confession of our dark side, so to speak.
Right. So the third stage about this responsibility is about discriminative will and feeling attention. And so that's the responsibility. So we have a responsibility to get hip and to engage life in the full feeling dimension of money, that is your right livelihood, and adapt
or service,
and manage that in a real way. Food, and that's the source of this body's nourishment and health and well-being, and so food has to do with the body, and manage that, and not always seeking these kinds of pleasures and always feeding yourself through the food, but managing it so it's non-problematic and you handle it and you can move on. And sex, which is the emotional aspect of your relationship to your beloved in physical form.
And if you don't do it that way, then they become physical. Then you have sexing on it without emotion, which would be first stage. So but you have to become responsible emotionally, which then your sexuality is about love rather than pleasure, just mere pleasure.
And so out of these maladapted patterns that people have, there are particular strategies that people develop, and they are characteristically the vital character who just comes out of this kind of the third chakra here. We have the peculiar, which just basically is ascended into some kind of a higher level of mind, which is the emotional aspect. Or we have the solid individual, which is just the mind, and he's logical and he's
standing on the emotions and body.
Right.
Master has a great understanding, of course, of how this arises. He says when the shock of birth, that me and everything else, that is the primary impact of being born. There's me and everything else. And because there's that sense of me and everything else, there's a sense that there's my energy and every other energy. There's the body and everything else, all the energy that's everywhere. Well, that's inherently a conflict or a schism, that felt sense. And so he says we try to resolve that prior to resting, prior to the kind of responsibility that the third stage fulfillment would yield. He says there's three ways to try to resolve that partially. He says because the conflict is between the body and everything else, well, if you exhaust the body, then the conflict between the body and everything else is going to be diminished.
So that would be the vital.
So the vital tries to exhaust the body. I remember trying to learn this myself, and I remember I finally got it deeply. I mean, I understood it on some kind of level. I'm obviously that kind of a person. But I remember I was taking a dump, and I went to just take the toilet paper off the roll. And instead of just, taking toilet paper, every action I'm trying to throw off extra energy. Everything I do with a little extra push, because I'm trying to exhaust the body. If you exhaust the body, constant talking, people that talk all the time, exhaust the body. If you exhaust the body, then you don't feel the conflict between the body and everything else. Another way to do it, that would be the vital, of course. Another way to do it is to escape the body in emotional and energy flights. Ooh, and all la 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 la, all that kind of masturbating the etheric dimension.
But also the emotional dimension.
Which will associated with that. So it's a kind of a masturbatory, instead of masturbating or exhausting the physical, you're masturbating or flying in emotional terms. So all the kind of emotional flights, whether it's romantic or what I call fake spirituality, the Hare Krishnas in the street. Now they may be really truly devotional, or they may just be throwing off emotional energy. So would be what he calls the peculiar. So here's another, and then the solid, another way of dealing with the body, instead of flight from it, is to stand on it. And the body is down there, and you always think before you act, and order and all those kinds of, it's a way of dealing with the body, of putting the body in a lesser position than it is for real, so that you don't have to feel the conflict with the body and everything else. So that birth moment where you have that felt sense, pre-verbal for sure, felt sense of me and everything else, there's these partial solutions of vitality, peculiarity, as Adi Da characterizes it, and solidity, or vital exhaustion, emotional flights, and mental abstraction. So those are the three characteristics of partial solutions to the inherent felt sense. Now,
and those solutions,
partial
in
solutions,
the third stage of life, always manifest themselves as drama, as dramatizations. Third stagers thrive and exist on drama. This conflict has to be manifested in drama.
There you go. And then that is the real solution is to rest as the body.
Absolutely. And this is where the equanimity, and the centeredness and the balance and the challenges of the third stage of life must adapt to this kind of center of energy with this feeling attention through the body, and you're not trying to throw it off either through your vitals, through your emotions, or through your mental. You sit with this place.
You rest as the body in love. When you rest as the body in love, then the conflict between the body and everything else is maturely undone. And so it's only when we're trying to undo that felt sense without rest as the body in love that you're going to have every drama and every characteristic. The Enneagram is actually, the nines are all, if you'll look at them, they're all versions of vital, peculiar, and solid. Right. And if you're a lot of vital and some peculiar, you're number so-and-so and whatever, these are the three fundamental irresponsibilities, as the Enneagram is for those people who like that kind of stuff. Enneagram are 9 forms of irresponsibility. They're not just 9 personality types we need to know so we can talk and be more, blah, blah, blah. It's irresponsible. Those are ways that we can be, these are the 9 ways we can be irresponsible.
And then the search goes, so let's see who I am in this.
Yeah.
And then let me find out about me, and let me figure. And so the search then goes for psychological acuity and psychological understanding. And so you become more of a psychologist, and you're investigating all this.
And that's all good on one level, but the root of it is still partial. Right. It's another form of partial solution.
So I think we've basically covered. We're going to be kind of massaging the same kind of form here if we keep on speaking. And I thought maybe at the end of our third stage presentation, and next week we'll get into the fourth stage of life, the movement into the fourth stage of life.
Really theoretical, of course. No, I'm teasing.
Is a poem that you have.
It's Adi Da's poem, and I think it summarizes many of these things. And he says, "There's a force of loneliness around my heart. It is not a mood that rises sometimes in my life. It's the power of the world. It is all that counters my desires. When I turn toward the heart, before I understand, I stand in a world of loneliness that sees the things. I look at all the world through a ring of power that sees the things. My heart becomes sorrowful, and I am afraid. This is the crucial clarity of man. When he sees it, then he understands. He turns and draws it with him in the heart, like a string around a beaded sack, like a cord that holds your solid trousers up. He draws it with him in the heart, and all things fall to nothing in the joy. Praise Adi Da.
And so, thank you very much, and we will see you next week.